speak to you guys. Forgive me for using the term guys. I'd like to speak to you distinguished ladies and gentlemen that are in this place about the work that has been done on the continent, especially in terms of online rights for women, specifically by one of the partners for this meeting that we're in, which is CIPESA. I've been fortunate enough to do quite a number of research projects with them and also work with them on some of the forums that they've held. And I think it's important to recognize that there are a lot more women that are taking up political spaces now, political voices. And because of the underrepresentation of women in society offline, that is still reflected even online. There's still underrepresentation of women's voices online, and there's still many other challenges that women face when they decide to use these digital spaces. So in terms of CIPESA, CIPESA is one of the leading institutions for research and analysis of information that allows for collaborations and builds capacity for countries to deal with specific issues relating to internet governance. But I think I'll restrict some of their work to protecting women online. And I think the Honorable Minister set a very good tone for us by mentioning some of the instruments that already exist.
Aspiration to become a minister, please.
Oh, my apologies. From the ministry, rather.
Yes.
Some of the instruments that already exist that work towards the gender digital divide, but also towards gender equality. There are quite a number of instruments. One of them, obviously, is CIDAW that she mentioned. I would like to believe some of us in this room are aware of those instruments. But also, I think a lot of our rights are anchored really on the Universal Declaration for Human Rights. But also at national level, most of that is enshrined in our constitution. So that should be the bedrock of our human rights approach in terms of protecting women online. It's that our constitutions, I would like to believe the Namibian constitution, the Zambian constitution, the Zimbabwean constitution, and any other country in SADC has a constitution that guarantees freedom of expression, that guarantees access to information, that guarantees freedom of association. And it's from there that we then begin to build the rest of the cause. But also it's recognizing that even though those rights are guaranteed in our constitution, because of the kind of society we live in, the power dynamics and the power relations are very, very different, especially when it comes to women. So yes, the rights are guaranteed in the constitution, but when it comes to the lived realities of women in different countries, we have not even reached to those aspirations that our lovely constitutions have guaranteed us. So on paper, you know, we are all born equal, we are all free, we are all on equal footing, we should enjoy basic human rights. But the reality is that women are the majority of the people who are denied our humanity based on our gender. You know, and that reality is also reflected online. And so I think it's important in a room like this for you to know that CIPESA, for example, has the Africa Digital Fund's Digital Rights Fund, which is a fund that is now dedicated to promoting the protection of women online and promoting initiatives that seek to promote digital openness, affordability, access, and all of those nice things that we'll be talking about in this room, that there's actually organizations that are working on the ground to ensure that this space that was neglected for a very long time, or this space where people did not realize the power of ICT in driving development, you know, because it's such a broad thing when you talk about it broadly, but when you break it down and begin to have those nuanced conversations and hear from women's experiences when they are online, you then begin to realize that it's actually something that needs to be, there has to be a strategy, there has to be a mechanism, there has to be a deliberate effort to target women because they experience the internet differently from somebody else who's using it for work, for example, using it for business. But even when you're using it for business or for work, the fact that you're a woman means that you experience that space very, very differently from other individuals. I think that one of the things that I really wanted to point out is the digital space now is a place where you can have positive conversations, you can start discussions, but in the context of women, and I think this is true for SADC and not only for Namibia, is that there tends to be, discussions that are started online that are very aggressive in nature when it comes to women, especially women in politics, because we're speaking about women that have public voices in this space. They tend to become very, very inflammatory, very, very rude, very, very irate. And I think it's because women have been put on this pedestal where morality, the burden of morality is on you as a woman in society. So even when you run for political office, suddenly you are the custodian of morality in your country. And so everything that can be thought of, from objectifying you to sexualizing you, becomes something that is very targeted towards you because you're running for office and because you're a woman. And I think we've seen that happen a lot online. And it's even worse online because of the aspect of anonymity. I think that in interactions offline, of course, we face very harsh conditions. But when it comes to online, somebody has the luxury of thinking nobody can find me, nobody can see what I'm doing, nobody can trace me. So they tend to be very, very aggressive in how they highlight women online. So that's why we've seen, the easiest way to bring a woman down who's running for political office is just leak her pictures, or pictures that were taken in a private space, leak them out in the public, and I can guarantee you, because of that one act, everything else, all the doors politically will close for that person. So you find that those kinds of targeted harassment are for women. If that ever happened to a gentleman, everybody just glosses over it. I mean, I don't know if this saying is there here in Namibia. In Zambia, they would tell you men are men. Boys are boys, Actually, they'll even go a step further. For example, in the context of a family setup, they would tell you that a gentleman can go out of his home and do anything he wants and it will not break the family unit. But when the woman does it, that's it. And that also speaks to the fact that the burden of morality, the burden of holding society together has been placed on women, but women do not enjoy the benefits and the rights of being part of that society. So I think that instead of going into the country specifics of SADC in terms of regulations and frameworks that exist, I think it would do us a great favor in this particular meeting to then speak about the experiences of Namibia and other countries, so that by the end of the meeting, we can then forge a way ahead in terms of how to address online violence against women, because it is a reality. And I think that it's become increasingly a blended thing. Online and offline are completely blended now. You cannot really separate, you cannot really tell where which one starts and where which one ends. But I think it's the dynamics of what happens when women converse online. And when they face backlash, what do? Most of them would rather shut down their social media accounts. I would rather not engage at all, instead of having people constantly victimizing me online. So what does that do? It then takes away from the fact that we're trying to bring everybody along. There's an agenda, obviously, in Africa where we have to carry everybody along, that we have to decrease the gender gap. But because of women's experience online, it then forces you to go offline, because you don't want to constantly have to deal with that backlash online that people get away with, because our society is structured in such a way that it favors one gender over the other. So I think that I'm looking forward to hearing from everyone in this room your personal experiences, first of all, and if at all you've understood why it's important to keep women safe online. I think there was a very important statement that was given here, and it's that we shouldn't only give access, but then we should also concentrate on giving people the means to protect themselves online. So now it becomes important to train women in cybersecurity. It becomes important to train women in how to notice harmful behaviors online. It becomes important to advocate for our justice system, for our legal systems, to prosecute people who harass women online, who are violent towards women online. So that we should look at it from that perspective. If somebody harasses me online, I should be able to go to court and I should be able to get justice for that. But how do we get to that place where we recognize that violence against women online is just as bad as violence against women offline? But because we haven't really, as countries across Africa, and this is real for countries across Africa, maybe even elsewhere in the world, it's because we've never really sat down to look at this as an emerging issue that needs to be addressed. That's why we kind of seem like we are lagging behind. But I think it's important that conversations like this are beginning to happen, because it's out of this that policy is shaped, that frameworks that already exist are then brought to your attention, and you can then build mechanisms to protect women online. So that I think that instead of boring everybody with the frameworks and the legislations that exist, I think it would be a much more effective conversation if we can see how much we understand the need for safety, how much we understand what digital platforms can do for us, how much they can improve the quality of our lives, how much they can help in the development agenda for our various countries. And then from there we can have even more conversations and questions that can be answered in terms of how can you help women stay safe online? How can you also help identify harmful behaviors online? And how can that be done in a structured way in terms of policy, frameworks? Because if we just talk and talk and talk and there's no policy on paper that will actually then help us to implement, then it becomes a futile exercise. So I hope that that has helped set the tone for the discussions.